Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 376, or episode 11 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. This is our inaugural Do Not Be Hasty Mailbag episode. Greta,
Awesome.
we have some amazing watchers and listeners, but you knew that, right?
Oh, duh. I mean, who doesn't know that?
You doy.
The doy.
doy.
No, yes, I did know that, and I think everybody knows that, or anyone that's familiar with our podcast knows that.
Well, I was seriously blown away by the amount of feedback and everything, and not just the amount, but the quality of it.
Okay.
This is going to be a great episode. So
I'm excited. I don't get to see I don't really get to see or hear about any of this stuff until we do this episode because you handle all the communication. So I'm super stoked.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Right on. Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R, KG, Melkor27, SaberSystems, and Jeremy D.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks, guys.
our amazing executive producers. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in June of 2024. And the 1 year club, Richard BW. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
And jumping ahead a little here, in the 5 year club, Teresa C.
Wow.
Teresa C. 5 years. Thank you so much, Teresa.
That's awesome.
We really appreciate your support. And then in the 7 year club, James L. James L.
James L. 7. Lucky number 7. That's awesome. I didn't
Yeah.
know we've been around for 7 years.
We've been around, since we started. We started this in early 2015. So over 9 years at this point. Over 9 years we've been up to this.
Okay.
Patreon didn't start until a few years later. Our Patreon didn't start until a few years later. Hey, drop a comment if you've been here since the beginning. If you've been listening since early days. If you've been listening to us since 2015, we want to hear from you. It's a fun question.
It is a fun question. I like that.
But very much appreciate James, Teresa, Richard, appreciate the three of you, and thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years.
Yes, thank you.
All right. In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we hit the mailbag for your thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 1, A Long Expected Party. And by the way, you guys delivered big time. While we won't be able to get to nearly everything you wrote in the YouTube comments, on our Patreon page, and elsewhere, we're going to hit some great stuff from a lot of different folks, so buckle up for a fun ride.
Ooh.
By the way, I want to clarify. I don't keep anything from Greta. It's just.
No, that's not what I was implying at all. I was just saying you handle all the communication.
Well, I just didn't want it to make. I mean, I'm a little bit of a control freak, but I didn't want to make it sound like I'm a humongous control freak, and I'm like, you're not allowed to see any of the correspondence.
No. And if I asked, I know you would share, but I mean, I think I did try to take over the communication at one point, and it was a disaster. So.
You did a good job. I am a little bit of a control freak, and I think it just ended up making sense for me to kind of be the overall. I'm planning the episodes and that kind of thing, and so it made a little more sense. But I mean, I show Greta things from time to time, especially cool little comments, really sweet things you all say. We hear from people, and that
is true. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and next time you want to just audit our comments, make sure I'm not leaving anything really great out, feel free.
Give me access and I'll do it.
All right. Well, we're going to kind of go through with each part and hit some of the big comments, mainly from YouTube and Patreon, a couple of emails to the Tolkien Road podcast at gmail.com. Those will be our main sources. I know people also provide feedback in other locations, Twitter, Instagram. I see stuff come through on the Podbean side of things, but I haven't figured out how to actually access that yet. And I know there's other places, but those seem to be kind of our main listening posts, the main places people comment. So if you want to be heard, if you weren't heard on this one, you left a comment somewhere else, but you want to be heard in the future, I'd encourage you to go to our YouTube comments or to our Patreon page and leave your comments there. So those are probably the best two places for it. So, and if you want to keep it more private, you can go to our Tolkien Road podcast at gmail.com. So those are the three best places.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about part 1, our very first episode in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. We are going to jump over to our YouTube comments.
Okay.
So, just wanted to hit some of the really awesome things that you guys said from Inerthil, who we'll be hearing from a lot in this episode. I really liked Greta's theory that 33 might be the coming of age for hobbits because that was the age Jesus was when he died, was resurrected, and came into the inheritance of his heavenly kingdom. Tying anything to Jesus during Lent is always a good thing, in my honest opinion. Yes, indeed. Definitely an interesting connection.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. Witless795 said, "You know it's for real when it takes 13 minutes to get past the chapter title." So that's right. That's how we roll. That's how we roll over here.
13 minutes, yes, sir.
Move myself over here so you can see the comments a little better. Ebba Zach Riazon 3736. That's a mouthful. Super stoked to finally see you both and to follow this series. We are stoked to be back.
Yes,
We're stoked to be back
totally.
for sure.
For sure.
4 terms for Biden. Interesting user handle there. Normally try not to dive into the electoral issues here. I'm glad to get in on the ground floor this time.
Oh.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah,
We're glad you're here.
absolutely.
Animal Mother 8037. Really enjoyed this deep dive into Lord of the Rings with you guys. Keep them coming. Well, you keep coming back, Animal Mother 8037. Yeah. 3 walking poles. Dream team together again. Let's go.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, dream team.
That's awesome.
Indeed. I know.
We got a high five.
Absolutely.
Dream team high five. Woohoo.
Greta was gone for far too long. Away from for far too long, for sure.
Oh, man. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a couple of longer comments that I wanted to hit. We have Pilgrim of Ithilien. Boom. This is exciting. Indeed.
I love it when anybody uses the word boom. It's like my go-to.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this one is from PW Miles 56. And this is another YouTube commenter that we'll be hearing from quite frequently throughout the mailbag episode. So thank you. Thank you so much, PW Miles 56, for the many comments you've left. PW Miles 56 says, "Nice to join you at the get-go. I was surprised to find Eleventy in the Oxford English Dictionary with a couple of citations before Tolkien. One is from the Boston Post in 1905. Tolkien had an American friend at Oxford, and it wouldn't surprise me if the word took his fancy as a humorous Americanism."
Oh.
The OED doesn't give any Old English derivation, by the way.
That's interesting.
Sackville is actually an aristocratic name in England, having once been borne by the Dukes of Dorset. A famous Sackville in the 1930s was Vita Sackville West, a.k.a. the Sissinghurst Sizzler. Okay, I made that last part up, but it fits her reputation. So I went and read a little bit about Vita Sackville West on her Wikipedia page. Definitely can see how that name, the Sissinghurst Sizzler, might have come up in your mind. So it definitely seems to fit her reputation. So interesting historical Sackville figure there.
Yeah.
So
How about that?
a lot of these PW Miles 56, I would say, leaves a lot of these kind of very kind of bringing the knowledge, bringing the knowledge to the table in a lot of ways. Very much educated me on a lot of things going through this, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And then wanted to highlight a really awesome comment from Tom McArdle. Tom, we haven't. It's been a while since we've heard from Tom.
Yeah.
Longtime listener. Really, really great to have you back, Tom. Tom says, "Wow, 2035. I love the idea. I hope I make it to the end. I'll be 70 or 71, depending on the month."
Oh, totally doable, Tom.
Totally doable. Absolutely.
Yeah.
May you live many years beyond 70 and 71. So hopefully it'll go, you'll be with us still in 2035 and well beyond. So
absolutely.
All right. Tom says, "It's been a very hard 18 months. Glad to make it back for this journey." We are glad you're back, Tom. I guess you're becoming more entish. You only say something if it is worth taking a long time to say, and Aragorn concurs with Greta. The hasty stroke goes off to stray. So,
yay.
Yes.
I'm in good company. I like that.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. So let's jump over to our Patreon page for episode 1. And we're also hearing again from a longtime listener who it's been a little while since we've heard from this individual. And this is Dr. William Hutton.
Dr.
William Hutton. Yep.
Very cool.
I will note a note from KG, one of our executive producers. Looking forward to this epic journey, especially if it helps me to avoid being hasty.
I love it.
Dr. Hutton says, curious about the number of rings that were made. 9 for men, 7 for dwarves, never dwarfs, 3 for the elves, and 1 to rule them all. During your podcast, I noticed these numbers are all prime except for 9, meaning that men were divisible and dwarfs and elves were not. Thoughts? Yeah, this is a really interesting observation. I can't remember if this has ever occurred to me before. You know, I don't know what I'd take away from that if the prime number thing was intentional on Tolkien's part. For 7 and 3, you know, obviously. And just so everybody knows, Greta, do you remember what a prime number is from your high school days?
I dug depth into my mathematical knowledge, and I believe it's a number that's only divisible by itself in 1.
That's correct.
Okay.
Boom, nailed it. Nailed it. So 9 is obviously divisible by 3, so it's not a prime number, but 7 and 3 are prime numbers, right? And 1 is a prime number as well. So why was 9 chosen for men? Dr. Hutton seems to think it is because it makes men divisible, right? I mean, for me, that sounds like a pretty good theory. Now, I don't know if anywhere Tolkien saying like that's the reason he chose 9 for men. But you know, I guess it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he did, right?
Divisible in the sense that they sector off and like divide against one another, because I feel like the dwarves do that too. Like,
well, the elves certainly do as well. If you read the
the elves do too. I was thinking maybe it has something to do with the immortality of the elves, but I mean dwarves are mortal, right?
Dwarves are.
I mean, they
dwarves
live longer
are
than
mortal.
men.
Yes, they live a long time, but they are mortal, as are men. And I think it's something. Maybe it doesn't mean that men are divisible. You know, it's like pointing to men's divisibility as a group, because obviously, like we said, dwarfs could be divisible. Although I feel like dwarfs, as far as like all of the different peoples of Middle Earth, are the least divisible in terms of the stories of the Legendarium. Like they seem to band together pretty well. Elves certainly divisible from the stories of the Silmarillion, and men obviously are as well. I almost think of this in terms of like men's like individual divisibility, like divisibility within themselves, right? Within a particular individual man, right? That man is divided, kind of
like alter egos. You mean, or
not so much alter egos. You could make that case with like Gollum, maybe, right? Being
or maybe even Boromir.
Probably lots of different characters, but just in terms of like the fleeting nature kind of their existence in this world and of their life in this world, right? It's so much shorter than elves. Obviously, it's even shorter than dwarves, even though dwarves are mortal. So maybe there's something to that notion that men are, just divisible in terms of their lives, their lifespan, right? They're always kind of searching for something permanent, but they just seem to be kind of like easily scattered, right?
Yeah, I can. Yeah,
like spiritually scattered.
I can see that. Yes, I can see that.
Like for me, the dwarves are kind of hardy in a way, right? They're not like they're always kind of like unified and within themselves, right? And I would even say elves are to a certain extent,
Okay.
But men seem to be like just easily pulled in multiple directions.
Yeah, I can see that. That. I'm a little intrigued too, just by the fact that 9 is obviously divisible by 3, and it was 3 for the elves, and so there's like literally 3 times as many rings for men as there are for elves.
Yeah.
That, what you were saying about the connection between the elves and men. Like, I wonder if there's some kind of implied connection there between the men and the elves. Because you think of elves, like, you almost think of them, obviously they're not, like, I know this isn't, like, canonically true, but it's almost like men are, like, a fallen version of elves, maybe? The elves are what the men were meant to be. Like, in a perfect world, obviously, before Melkor came and did all his, bad stuff. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more proper to say, and we got a lot of mail to get to, so we can't go way far down this rabbit trail. But I think men, in terms of the Legendarium, as Tolkien thought about it more, were always meant to be mortal. It was just that death in this world was not meant to be this kind of fine, be viewed with like suspicion and fear and that kind of thing, but more of a falling asleep, right, at the natural end of one's lifespan. And that's what you see with the Numenorians when they're granted, especially at first when they're granted longer life. But very interesting, very interesting point, very interesting observation, great food for thought, indeed. So, Dr. Hutton, great to have you back, and I think we'll be hearing from him again and some other feedback. So let's move on to part two here. All right. Challenging to make sure I get these big enough. So there we are on the screen, Greta, kind of looking right back at you.
My crazy eyes.
All right.
Nothing to worry about, guys. Everything's fine.
So another new new member of our fellowship who had a lot to contribute in this episode is Harrison C. So Harrison, welcome to our fellowship. We're going to be hearing from him a whole lot. I'll go ahead and read a couple of his comments from part 2. The prologue suggests a reason why the hobbits disliked water, though the reason seems more of an exacerbating factor than an underlying one. It says that they treated the sea as a token of death because of the growing distrust they felt towards the elves, who are associated with the longing for the sea. And then he also says, yet it's interesting how the Stores like to live by the water, which raises questions as to why they have a totally different approach to water. So,
remember who the Stores are?
The Stores were the people, and we'll learn more about them in the next run of episodes through chapter 2. But they are basically the people from whom Gollum came, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
Smeagol
Okay.
was a Store.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
And they lived close. They lived close on kind of on the banks of the Anduin, on the other side of the Misty Mountains. Way back once upon a time. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Yep. So we'll be hearing more from Harrison, and let's jump to our YouTube comments for this episode here. All right. So this is from Joe Cool 4606. Joe Cool says, around 32:30 in this episode, you mentioned wanting to know the adventures Bilbo may have had after returning home and before his 111th birthday. See the One Ring starter set or Lord of the Rings 5e Shire Adventures game by Free League. There are some well-written ideas for things that could have gone on in the Shire involving Bilbo, Balin, and several Bagginses, Tooks, and Brandybucks. You can run with these and have your own adventures in that time and place. Even if role-playing games are not your thing, I think these books, with their attention to accurate lore and fantastic art, would be something you would enjoy. Yeah, I looked these up, and they look really cool. For me, all of the different like video games and card, kind of role-playing card games, and then the role-playing games, all these things, they're things I wish I had more time for in the world, honestly. It's... we're at a time in our lives where just a lot of different stuff going on, not a whole lot of free time, especially when it comes to producing this podcast in addition to all the other things. But I definitely would love to get my hands on just some kind of, I know it's not necessarily canonical, but some well-written sorts of ideas about like what were the other adventures that Bilbo went on, between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and his 111th birthday.
Yeah. So, a little bit of fan fiction, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe authorized fan fiction. I'm not sure if you'd call it that, but anyway, it's interesting to think. I'm not sure. There was recent news about on this note. There was recent news about Peter Jackson will be producing some new films that are kind of based on like I think other like the stories that take place between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. For like I think one of them might end up being like The Hunt for Gollum, and those stories. So Jackson's going to be producing those films. The first one I think is supposed to arrive in about 2 years.
How about that?
So we are going to be getting more information about like kind of the interstitial happenings in some of these things, which is it's interesting. It'll be exciting to see how those turn out. And I'm all for like people telling stories. I just I want them to be good stories,
right?
And telling like other stories and kind of like in the interstitial areas. This year, of course, there's the War of the Rohirrim that's supposed to be coming out, I think, towards Christmas.
Yeah.
Excited to see how that turns out. So, anyway, Joe Cool, appreciate you, and thanks for the comment. Hopefully, one of these days I'll get a chance to check out your recommendations there. But hope others learn about these things and can check them out as well. All right, another comment from Anerthil. Anerthil says, here is an excerpt from the Encyclopedia of Arda, and this actually came up on our recent MATHOMS episode in terms of this word Michel, delving. So Michel comes from Old English Micel. In Old English, the letter C, in these circumstances at least, would normally be pronounced as modern ch. So in ch. So in rendering the name Michel, Tolkien simply seems to be adjusting the spelling to make it simpler for a modern audience to read and pronounce. So basically, Michel delving means simply large excavation. It just throws me off because whenever I see, I guess I would normally want to say ch when I see ch, right? Ch, right? But when I see that word, I think it's closer to Michael,
exactly,
than it is to Mitchell.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Mitchell being Mitchell, right? Normally for me.
Yep.
Michael being Michael. So I want to say it Michel or Michael, but sounds like it should be pronounced Mitchell. Mitchell delving. So
okay. So a short I.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going with Mitchell delving until someone else can explain something, can make a case for something else to me.
Okay. Not Michel.
Right. Mitchell.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. There we go.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to part 3, we'll go to our Patreon page for part 3 here. All right. So another comment from Dr. Hutton. This one has to do with the excuse me, let me clear my throat there. Sorry for the loud throat clearing on the audio there. So Dr. Hutton says, I wonder if the crackers mentioned when Gandalf's wagon is being unloaded are traditional English crackers, considering Tolkien was English. My mother and father-in-law are from Britain, so we have some English traditions around the holidays. For Thanksgiving and Christmas, we always have crackers, which is a bit like a wishbone with a small prize and popping firework inside. They take 2 people to open, but only one gets the prize, as the cracker is designed to break in 2, leaving one person with a prize and the other with nothing. They also usually have a paper crown that you can wear. Silly family traditions.
That sounds fun.
That does sound fun.
That sounds really fun.
I love silly family traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I especially love silly family traditions that have come down, like from other countries, but also like through many generations, and you do them because they are like it's a family tradition. Got to keep it up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the world needs more of those because
totally
at the end of the day, they may feel silly, but they keep you connected in some small way to people who have come before us, right?
Exactly.
And there's something beautiful about that.
And especially when it's from a different country.
Yeah.
I think that's just really, really cool.
Yeah.
As a way to kind of keep that part of your family, your family heritage alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like have a connection to it. Like a real tangible connection.
Yeah, those of Scandinavian ancestry might know what I'm going to mention here, but like I don't know, I've never experienced this myself, but years ago we had a friend who was of, I think, I want to say Swedish descent, some Scandinavian descent, and he would talk about this like fish that they always ate at Christmas.
Oh yeah.
And and he would just say it was the grossest thing to him. He hated it, but it was this family tradition, so they always did it. They had to do it.
Yeah.
So, sometimes they may involve things that are not very palatable to us these days, but still, there's something to them. You feel like you've got to keep it up.
Yeah.
Got to keep it up.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Hutton. Thanks again. Another comment from PW Miles 56. So we'll jump over here. Looks like lots of comments on this one. All right. Okay, so this is more on firecrackers. PW Miles 56 says, great stuff. The OED defines squib, a common species of firework in which the burning of the composition is usually terminated by a slight explosion. Squibs are straight cylindrical cases about 6 inches long, firmly closed at one end, tightly packed with a strong composition, and capped with touch paper. In less healthy and safety-conscious times, they were often thrown around. With snapdragons, I remember as a child making them snap by squeezing the flower. Oh, I didn't know you could do that with the flower itself.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So, so just some interesting kind of further commentary on some types of fireworks, and didn't know that about snapdragons as flowers that you could do that. I will mention this comment here from an Airtail. I found a reference for nasturtium that says it means nose twister in Latin. So nose twister.
I like that.
Yeah. So if you know somebody who likes to twist people's noses, right, then you can just call them a nasturtium. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking that someone that could twist their own nose. Kind of like making their tongue curl, but instead they could twist their nose.
It can be both, I guess. Somebody who likes to, do the Three Stooges things like that.
Oh, like your dad. Yeah. Your dad used to love to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Or nose honking. That was
that's
more nose
true.
honking.
That's
I guess that works too.
It's in the same vein.
Still nasturtium.
Definitely. Yeah.
Another comment from PW Miles 56. The Shire is actually a composite of 3 historical eras: Anglo-Saxon, from which terms like thane, sheriff, and shiremoot originate; late medieval, 14th to 15th century. The common hobbits have only been using surnames for a few generations, which happened in England from the 13th and 14th centuries; and late Victorian to Edwardian around 1900. Literally, the Shire stands for the everyday world, the jumping-off point for the hero's journey, which Tolkien anticipates, since Joseph Campbell's book came out only from 1949. Everything beyond is fairy, where, as Tolkien said in a 1968 interview, imagination is set loose. And that's from it's from an interview Tolkien in Oxford that you can find on YouTube. So, yeah. So this is just kind of we were talking about like how there's so many anachronisms that seem to exist within the Shire.
Yes.
And it's this interesting sort of puzzle because Tolkien was so meticulous about making everything making sure all the details were right and everything was right in its place. And so like, if this story takes place so many, ages ago, well before the time of Christ, then, why are there these things which seem to be much more recent, sorts of inventions in the story? And so that's kind of what PW Miles 56 is commenting on here.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
Tom McArdle again says, I wonder if the description of Gandalf in the Shire is from a hobbit's perspective. Perhaps a short-statured hobbit looking up at Gandalf would have seen his features in a different way. Maybe from below, if his hat was tilted back somewhat, his bushy eyebrows would have been quite striking in appearance. Could Gandalf have even altered his appearance, creating a more humorous and non-threatening appearance for the sake of the Shire folk? He certainly could appear to be an ominous person at times.
That's a great
I like
point.
that.
I
Yeah.
like that.
I really like that. Both of those, right? So, kind of think that the hobbits looking up at Gandalf, he's basically a giant compared to them, right?
Absolutely.
And, especially if he's looking down, like if he does have bushy eyebrows, they could appear to be, from that angle kind of sticking out beyond even the brim of his hat, especially if the brim is not a very prominent brim.
That's true. That's true.
So, and then, maybe Gandalf did. Like, he could change his,
as a Maya, he definitely could.
Why couldn't he have made himself, look more, kind of humorous and friendly, just so that they wouldn't be too afraid of him? He's this giant man, seeming man tramping around, this village.
For sure. Yeah.
So, I love those points,
Makes a lot of
Tom.
sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense to me. I'd be inclined to go with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Same.
And of course, it fits with the notion that Bilbo was the one that we're kind of reading Bilbo's description of these things, right? Because it's the within the Legendarium, we know these stories because it's the Red Book of West March. So that Bilbo and then Bilbo wrote, and then Frodo and Sam finished later on.
It's true. So yeah, it would be from a Hobbit's perspective. Yeah,
absolutely.
That makes
this
sense.
description would be.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Tom. Yeah.
All right, moving on to part 4. Back to our Patreon page here. All right, so this comment, another comment from Dr. Hutton. So make this a little larger there. The Hobbit children playing with their crackers and musical instruments from the Dale during Bilbo's after-dinner speech confirmed my theory about the crackers being English party favors and not fireworks. So there you go.
Yep.
Just to note, Dr. Hutton also said, I need to read a little more hastily. I've only just come to the fireworks part. Glad you are taking it slow this time around. Thanks for the podcast. And I said, Treebeard is 100% okay with your lack of haste, and so are we.
Amen. Well said. Yeah.
And then Harrison C. Make sure it's tricky on the video ones because the video wants to autoplay. All right. So Harrison C. left on our Patreon page. I'm not a fireworks person, but it may be the contrast between the dazzling bright fizzes and the dark night sky, no clouds hopefully, and the fact that the fireworks kind of loom over everyone. They are bigger than life and so contribute to a sense of awe. Yeah, for sure. I can appreciate fireworks. I'm not the kind of person that gets, as I mentioned before, like super giddy about fireworks and everything, but like, I can appreciate their beauty and like kind of the ambiance of them.
Yeah.
On a nice evening, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
I absolutely love fireworks.
Yeah. I know I'm
a fireworks person.
You're a fireworks person for sure.
Yep.
Harrison also says, I love how Tolkien builds up the excitement for the party with increasingly shorter sentences as we reach the morning itself, and then how the descriptions of fireworks start out slow and soft, then building up into more exciting and action-packed elements, and finally culminating in the dragon. And it doesn't hurt to see possible flashbacks to things in the Legendarium. When I see eagles, I think of Thorondor and Gwaihir, swans, Tuor at Belegaer, and the Teleri at Alqualande. So
yeah, that's great.
Good stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Heading over to the YouTube comments for this episode, we've got 4 different contributors that I'll mention here. Once again, lots of good comments. That just didn't get around to including everything here. Do want to mention Messianic Jiu-Jitsu. Love this new approach to Lord of the Rings. In speed, never hasty. Right. So long-time listener there. Messianic Jiu-Jitsu. Thank you. Great to hear from you.
Yes.
Tom says, for me, fireworks are like music for the eyes. Like a song, fireworks are transient art. It begins, it progresses, then fades away, unlike other visual art forms like a painting or sculpture that are more permanent. Thanks for causing me to think about fireworks in this way. I think I will move them more again. I will love them more again, although age and infirmity can make the effort to go see them seem daunting.
Going to see fireworks, regardless of your age, I feel like is always daunting. Because there's always traffic and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I completely agree, Tom. I think that's a wonderful way to put it. I see fireworks very much the same way. Music for the eyes.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Music for the eyes. And
it's especially cool when they have music, like, queued up to kind of, like, in the background with the fireworks. Like, that's like a... that makes it even better. Well,
one of my all-time favorite like movie scenes is the film The Sandlot, when they and it's kind of a middle, in the middle of that film, there's this scene where the boys, the group of boys who are kind of the stars in the movie, are out in their neighborhood like on July 4th, and I think it's sometime in like the 50s or the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And and it's just like this kind of like idyllic, sort of like summer night. And there's this really wonderful version of America the Beautiful. That's kind of a jazzy, I can't remember who is the performer on the song. It's not Louis Armstrong, but it's somebody kind of like with that kind of voice.
Oh, is it the guy who does I'm totally blanking.
Is it Otis Redding?
No, I don't think it's Otis Redding. Is it the who sang It's a Wonderful World, Wonderful World?
That's Louis Armstrong.
Oh, that is Louis Armstrong.
That's Louis
okay.
Armstrong.
Are you sure it's not Louis Armstrong?
I'm almost positive it's not Louis Armstrong. It's somebody else who's on the tip of my tongue. Another great performer. Similar to Otis Redding or Louis Armstrong. But just beautiful kind of jazzy, slowed down rendition of that song. And the boys are kind of like looking up at the fireworks in the sky as they, as they do that. So it's just a really beautiful moment in that movie. So on the notion of like, it does kind of have that music for the eyes kind of feel to it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Ty Miller, who's a longtime listener and supporter, says, "It is a blessing to have been a supporter for 5 years." Let me find this comment. It's a blessing to have been a supporter for 5 years because it's been a blessing to have folks I've never met feel like family. So happy I'm back to listening to the episodes. I feel way behind and have been binge catching up. I feel like a long-lost friend that has returned home. Well,
I love that.
Absolutely. It's great to hear from you, Ty. And, I know other things come up. We've been at this podcast for a long time. Certainly I have podcasts I listen to, where I'll listen to them for a while and then stop listening, a lot, and then stop listening to them, and I'll come back to them later. Right. So it's wonderful to hear that we're, I take encouragement from that, knowing that we're the kind of podcast that people may go away from for a while, but they, a lot of times end up coming back to.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
So,
for sure. Yeah. I do love that.
That's a mark of, I think, producing something that's, worthwhile and lasts the test of time.
Yeah.
So
maybe a classic, if you will.
Perhaps. Well, I don't want to assign classic to my own works, but,
Well, I did it, not you, so it's fine.
Well, that's true. Yeah. All right. Okay. Another comment from David Albert 3834. Let's see if I can track this one down. All right. So this is on the whole controversy over Proudfoots versus Proud Feet. David Albert 3834 is Team Proudfoots. I always took it as Mr. Proudfoot being a smart arse and saying it could be Proud Feet since it's plural, but knowing it really is Proudfoots. That's why Bilbo kind of waves him off afterwards. So I'm Team Proudfoots. All right. So we'll have a few other people weigh in along the way on that question too.
Okay.
And then KG says there needs to be a T-shirt that says "Life is always better when you are on party business."
I totally agree.
So I need to get moving on that.
Yeah, you do.
I need to get moving on that. All right. Moving on to part 5. All right.
Sorry, the number of tabs you have open right now is like giving me extreme anxiety.
I'm closing a lot of them. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see there. There we go.
Ah, that's better. That's so much better. Thank you.
All right. So a couple of comments from Harrison C here. Harrison says, "I laughed hard at your back and forth on Proudfoots versus Proud Feet. Well debated. I am on the side of Proudfoots for the reason that is how you would refer to families, for example, the Oldmans. But I wonder if Bilbo's insistence on the use of Proudfoots was reflective of him being more learned than most hobbits, and so logically he would have known linguistic rules better than someone like Odo. Bilbo is also largely making use of his speech to poke fun at the other hobbits, and perhaps he intended to show others that he knew even how their family names should be pronounced better than they themselves did." So
agreed.
Yeah, good stuff.
I can't remember which team I was on, but I want to be on Proudfoots if I wasn't already. I think I was Proudfoots.
I think you were Proudfoots.
I think I was.
Maybe you were Proud Feet, though. I don't know.
I don't remember. But regardless, I want to be Proudfoots now.
You're convinced by Team Proudfoots?
I'm totally convinced.
Harrison also comments on the famous, no less than half of you half as well as I should like line. So he breaks it down. For the first half, Bilbo feels like he's gotten to know half of the 144 hobbits as well as he wanted to, but as for the other half, he hasn't gotten the chance to know them as well as he wants to. And for the second part of it, I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Among the gross of hobbits, Bilbo admits that he likes some of them only to a moderate degree, 50%, and not wholeheartedly, which is what they deserve. This group is fewer than 72 hobbits. As for the rest, which is more than 72 hobbits, Bilbo doesn't say. It could be that he likes them to a greater than moderate degree, more than 50% like, or wholeheartedly as they deserve. This would make the second part a compliment, albeit a difficult to process one.
Yeah, say that
again.
Or
he likes them to a less than moderate degree, less than 50% like, or doesn't like them at all. This would make the second part to be an insult to this larger group of hobbits, even if it was a compliment to the smaller group of hobbits. It's also an interesting question whether Bilbo made it up on the spot or had it prepared beforehand, but I lean on the latter because the text says that Bilbo was spending quite a bit of time preparing for the party and keeping everything quite secretive at Bag End. So
see, I tend to think it's the alcohol talking, personally.
Yeah.
But that just sounds like something you would say when you were a little bit buzzed. But
yeah, well,
maybe it's a combination.
It is a fantastic line to come up with when you know, on the spot, regardless.
Regardless.
If he did, unless he had prepared it beforehand. So
see, I feel like if I had prepared that ahead of time, I would mess it up. Like trying to memorize that and repeat it, I think I would fall over my words. It seems like it has to be like in the moment.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm going to turn on the air conditioning in our studio because it's starting to get a little warm in here.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So just hopefully there's not too much background noise, everyone. Last 2 points from Harrison. He says, I promise. Keep them coming, Harrison.
Yeah.
Tolkien is sparing in his description of Frodo's reaction to Bilbo's disappearance, and yet his skill with words shines forth. In a few lines, I can feel the shift from amusement at the Hobbit's outrage and us sharing with Frodo the sense of being in on Bilbo's joke, to a sudden tenderness that Frodo feels for Bilbo. The last part, when Frodo drains his cup silently, really speaks to your point, John, about that melancholic streak, which I also didn't notice until you raised it. Frodo didn't have any words to say, but his actions and thoughts beautifully convey the nature of his relationship with the old hobbit. Number two, I've usually listened to the podcast instead of watching the videos, but I now realize that part of the fun of the videos is watching how you both can't keep from smiling when you read parts of the text where Tolkien employs his subtle humor. For example, everyone sat up who still could. Anyway, wonderful episode. Thanks very much.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, good stuff.
I know. I love it. Like even when I was doing like a reading for our most recent episode, I found myself just like chuckling at like random things. That, I don't even know if Tolkien intended them to be funny, but they always seem to strike. There's always at least a couple chuckles, and even per page, I'd say.
Tolkien was just like he was the best kind of really smart person, where he's smart and puts it and employs it in like kind of clever and funny ways.
Yeah.
And I think that really shines forth in his writing, because it doesn't always seem like everything, like he's not like on the nose. He's not like, here I am trying to be funny, right?
Yeah. It's very dry.
Yeah.
And like very like almost like you would miss it.
Mm-hmm.
You would miss it if you were being hasty.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm really glad that we're not being hasty.
That we are not being hasty.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump over to the YouTube comments for this episode. I'm telling you, you guys killed it. Like, there was so much good stuff. I'm not even covering, I don't think, 50% of what you all left. So this is really good stuff.
I love the interaction.
Me too.
Yeah.
All right, so Kev Daly over on YouTube said, let me make this a little larger. All right, Sam must have a much less fancy waistcoat, since in the scouring of the Shire, when the travelers finally meet the gaffer again, he asks where Sam's waistcoat is. He's asked where Sam's waistcoat is. He's wearing mail. The foot, feet, goose, geese, man, men type of plural is common in other Germanic languages. There's no sign of it in Gothic, but that's because it's a very early example from before that change had occurred. The S or Z gets dropped from the end because the change of the preceding vowel makes it no longer necessary to mark the plural. We have party crackers here too. They usually contain a party hat, a piece of paper with a terrible joke, and some sort of toy or plastic something. Pulling the crackers is a way starting the festivities. Shout out to terrible jokes and as parts of party favors. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. Do we know where he's from?
Kev Daly?
Kev Daly.
I don't know. Kev Daly, if you hear this and want to let us know where you're from, we'd love to know. So
he just says that we have them over here. Maybe he's from the UK.
That would be my guess, considering sounds like he's kind of confirming what we learned from Dr. Hutton. And Dr. Hutton was saying, he has
in-laws from
English
Britain.
in-laws. Yeah,
that's true. Okay.
So, next up, Rursus 8354. Bilbo's waistcoat is woven from dwarven silk, which is most similar to steel wool. He couldn't afford mithril wool. Update. For a Swede, English is a very simple language. Interesting. The strong verbs are like the Swedish strong verbs. The plural is a paradise. Just add S, except in a very few cases that are very similar to Swedish plurals. Swedish plurals, on the other hand, is a real headache. Update. I'm pretty sure that the Hobbit culture to a certain degree allows people named Proudfoot having their feet on the table, and that they don't actually care about hygiene the same way that humans do. They are super resistant to diseases and damage. Update. Lots of updates to this one.
Yeah.
The numerology is pretty much irrelevant. Tolkien mentions a gross, which is a 12 times 12, as a common measure of trade items or wares. It is very common in medieval Europe. The fact that 12 is called 12 and not 2-teen indicates that there is an earlier 12 base interfering with the 10 numeric base of counting. Interesting. I never thought about that. Tolkien is not a numerology guy, and if he would have made a treaty about it, he would probably put it in the same box as astrology. A treatise about it, I think. He probably would have put it in the same box as astrology, i.e. some Numenorean folly or black magic. And then just to follow up on that, PW Miles 56 says the S plural is tricky when the word itself ends in an S. This happens with my own surname. We generally call ourselves Mileses and write it that way, like Baggins is. Another option is the grocer's plural, e.g. cabbages. This is still quite commonly seen and used to be correct, but has been rather arbitrarily ruled out. So it's I never thought about the whole 12 base, though, back to Rursus 8354's comment. But it makes sense in terms of like a foot, being the standard unit of measure for like the kind of the English system, the old school English, although I think they use meters, the metric system now in England. In America, we still use the old English system primarily. Yeah. And there's 12 inches in a foot.
Right. Right.
So that's interesting.
That is interesting.
I never thought of like that there was a time when maybe 12 was the basis upon which people counted.
As opposed to 10.
Yeah.
That is interesting to think about.
And then I love this comment. Messianic Jiu-Jitsu said, I don't want to be hasty myself, but perhaps a hasty alert or counter should be added whenever things start getting hasty.
I wonder what that looks like.
Ding, just like there needs to be a buzzer to ding us whenever we start getting a little too hasty. Yeah.
Or maybe a code word or something, like a safe word.
Yeah, if you guys feel the need at any point to rebuke us within the comments or something of that sort for being too hasty about something, then please feel free to do so.
Yeah.
We have a reputation to uphold. So, James Falinger 9731 says, by the way, have you guys noticed that YouTube is being absolutely flooded with AI-generated Tolkien content? Images, mostly, of characters and places. Some of it's interesting, at least at first, but after a while it all seems to have a kind of bland sameness that reminds me of that unfortunate TV miniseries from, when was it? A year and a half ago.
Is that it? Yeah.
But there's one really weird thing I discovered. A channel called Tolkien Time has employed 11 Labs voice synthesis to create audio versions of some of Tolkien's letters from the original volume in Tolkien's own voice. Oh. And it does indeed sound like Tolkien's own voice. What would the Tolkien children, all now mercifully perhaps passed on, have made of that? I don't think that they would have been very happy with it. However, I don't know. I kind of like the idea that, people... I try not to be completely, 100% closed off to the idea of AI, right? And kind of some of the interesting things it can do. I think the idea of, AI being used to generate Tolkien's voice based on what he actually sounded like is a really fascinating concept. And to be able to maybe... what if one day they could produce a Tolkien read audiobook version of Lord of the Rings? I think that would be pretty cool, right? Or do it like reading his letters, right, in his own voice. I think when it's matching of his authentic voice to his authentic writings, I think there's a case to be made that that's a legitimate and good use of AI, right? Or at least it's a it's a valid use of AI. I think that if it's used to make him say things that he never actually said, that's obviously bad.
Yeah,
right? That's
absolutely.
obviously evil and Sauron,
no,
right?
For sure. For sure.
But I don't know. I mean, it's just me kind of speaking extemporaneously here about that. So I don't know. What do you think, Greta? You probably haven't thought about as much about AI things as I have.
I actually do have something to say.
Okay, great.
It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it.
I like it.
That's all I have to say.
Tolkien's own words. Actually, these are the words of a hobbit that is commenting on Bilbo and his long age, right?
Exactly.
So,
but it's also my word, me repurposing Tolkien's words to apply them to AI.
The irony of that, though, is that it's kind of, we're meant to view that as like a stodgy old hobbit kind of saying this, right?
I'm fine being associated with a stodgy old hobbit.
Well,
I am very freaked out by AI. I will just be completely honest and upfront about that. It bothers me.
Well, you don't trust the you don't want to get into a car and just let AI start driving it for you?
No. I also don't want robots taking care of me when I get admitted to the hospital.
Yeah,
so,
I hear you.
That's just where I am on it.
Yeah. Well,
but I mean, I understand that it can be like, I feel like when responsibly used, it can have some good effects, but I think it's a very, very slippery slope.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me nervous.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, great comments, you all. Again, on part 5. Let's move on to part 6. All right. Alrighty, here. Let's get rid of some of these things. Close some of these windows so Greta doesn't get too anxious.
Thank you.
More from Harrison. I'm telling you, Harrison.
Wow, Harrison.
Harrison had a lot of thoughts to share, so we love it.
Sure did.
Harrison says, not quite sure if there's anything to make of it, but I find it curious that Bilbo and Gollum both were drawn to the Misty Mountains. Gollum wanted a place to hide from the glare of the sun, Bilbo, hopefully, for different reasons. A sinister theory, if you will. What if Bilbo's desire to return to the mountains was the ring exerting its will to try and return to its master by leading Bilbo to his doom in Moria? Remember that the ring tried to slip off Bilbo's finger at least once, which led Frodo to put it on a chain. The ring left Gollum when it realized Gollum was never going to leave the Misty Mountains. The ring left Isildur when it became clear he was not going to stay in Gondor any longer and was instead marching away from and not towards Mordor after the last alliance. That is really interesting. I hadn't thought about that maybe part of the reason Bilbo wanted to leave the Shire was the ring was exerting an influence on him to try to get him to journey in the direction of Moria, maybe even of Mordor, because it would be in the direction, at least moving along or a place easier to find for like the ring wraiths to find, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if Bilbo had kept it with him, it was going to find a time to slip off his finger somewhere between the Shire and Rivendell.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that it would be easier for the ring wraiths to find.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
It very well could be.
And then Harrison goes on to say, that was a great discussion, thanks. Appreciate your hard work on the etymology. Those are indeed curious finds. I'm with you both on what that shadow was. It's like the ring has the power to create enmity amongst friends, like how it later pitted Frodo against Sam or Boromir against Frodo. But I found it equally interesting what it was that caused the shadow to pass. It was Gandalf turning away. I read that as Gandalf walking away from using force to gain the ring, which I'm pretty sure is what the ring would have wanted. One could argue that the shadow passed because Gandalf resisted the temptation of the ring, and that deprived the ring of power to cause further division between Gandalf and Bilbo. Which leads to another point. Perhaps Gandalf was troubled because he knew not how to get Bilbo to give up the ring without breaking Bilbo's mind. That was the reason Elrond cited when he explained why he and Círdan did not force Isildur to throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Gandalf loved Bilbo, and he did not want to harm his friend, and yet he possibly feared that if Bilbo kept the ring, he would end up in the same miserable torment that Gollum now was in.
Yep.
Fantastic comments, Harrison.
Yeah.
Really kind of, I think, great reading between the lines there of a lot of this. I think it truly, like, the shadow passes when people resist the temptation of the ring, right? That's truly like kind of when the shadow passes. I think you're right. I think Gandalf is somewhat troubled because he feels kind of like, what if I kind of led these poor little hobbits into, with this ring, like having the burden of this ring, and they don't even know about the burden right now.
Right. I wonder too, like, just thinking about this, like the that temptation, resisting that temptation is almost like the shadow is that temptation to give in to despair, and which obviously Gandalf resists, right?
Yeah.
Because when you think about him, maybe in a sense regretting him involving the hobbits in this, maybe that shadow was like, the invitation just give in to despair and hopelessness and just give up, but yet he resisted that. So he chose hope. So
yeah. A little more on our YouTube comments. Another comment about the shadow from Tom this time. So, by the way, shout out to the cicada right outside my studio. That was just making itself known. Maybe you heard it on the recording. Cicada time here in Middle Tennessee. So Tom says, just a thought about the shadow. Maybe the shadow was the ring seeking to influence Gandalf as well as Bilbo. Perhaps Gandalf, troubled by the prospect of Bilbo not surrendering the ring, was tempted to think that he might have to force Bilbo into surrendering it, to prevent all from being lost. As Bilbo and Gandalf both resist their temptations, the shadow passes and they both become themselves again. So, more thoughts there from Tom on the question of the shadow. He also says, although Gandalf at this time wasn't certain about the nature of the ring, he was obviously concerned about it and suspected what it might indeed be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to read this one from PW Miles 56 because anytime Leaf by Niggle is brought up, I'm there. Bilbo's talk about the mountains reminds me of the mountains in Leaf by Niggle. Me too, very much. Tolkien dreamed Niggle around 1940. The date is hard to pin down, so he could have been working to this idea. I think I've always understood it to be around this time, 1939, 1940, when he was still fairly early in the stages of writing Lord of the Rings, and that somehow, anxiety over it had inspired this like kind of waking dream, waking up to this story just being in his head, right? That's the way I've always understood how Leaf by Niggle came about. He goes on to say, Niggle's mountains are pretty clearly the delectable mountains from Pilgrim's Progress. You go through a wicket gate to reach them. So it does read as Bilbo accepting his own mortality. Fun fact, the Delectable Mountains were inspired by the Chiltern Hills, which Bunyan would pass through when he walked from Bedford to preach in London. They are quite imposing as you approach from the north, but only about 800 feet at the highest. The power of imagination. I looked up the Chiltern Hills, which I was not familiar with before. Looked like a very beautiful area, just north of London. So maybe one of these days when we finally make our pilgrimage over to the UK, we will get a chance to see these Chiltern Hills and have an idea of what perhaps inspired Leaf by Niggle, the mountains in Leaf by Niggle.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Thank you, PW Miles 56. And then a little laughter here from Inerthil. Does Gandalf have a short temper? Cicada's back.
Yep.
PW Miles 56. I guess you mean in the sense of, is the Pope a Catholic? I love Ian McKellen in the role, but he is a bit mellower than Book Gandalf. Inerthil responds, true, Pippin knew how to get under Gandalf's skin.
So true.
Yeah, Gandalf does indeed have a short temper, I would say.
I would definitely agree. Yeah.
All right. Back to Harrison C. I think Harrison C definitely wins the award for comments in this mailbag episode.
For sure.
So setting the standard, I would say.
Setting the bar high,
and that's saying something, y'all, because like as you've seen, we've had some really great comments, a lot of really smart people weighing in on things. So this just confirms to me that doing this Do Not Be Hasty run through Lord of the Rings was a good call, right? Because definitely. I love the kind of discussion we're getting here.
Yeah.
Harrison says on episode 7, thanks for the discussion. Really cool to slow things down so we get to appreciate the finer details we usually miss when we read through. You got me wondering how Bilbo and Gandalf thought about the way to dispose of the ring through the party. Gandalf understood the hobbits well, and so it's plausible that he knew that hobbits love to give away things on their birthdays. And so to get Bilbo to give up the ring without telling Bilbo too much about the ring itself, Gandalf must have said something like, well, this is your big send-off party, so you've really got to give away everything you won't need in Rivendell. And that includes the ring. Bilbo may have tried to convince himself by saying what he did in the text. Well, since I'm giving away lots of stuff, then the ring needs to go too. And to Frodo, who will come into his inheritance.
Yeah.
And then Harrison says, I don't think Gandalf is anti-party since he was famous for his fireworks and was clearly enjoying himself at the expense of the hobbits. But he would have been very concerned if Bilbo turned back on his word to keep the ring at this point. I think Frodo had not come back to say goodbye because he had to attend to the crowd who was asking questions about Bilbo's disappearance. Maybe Gandalf didn't want Frodo there as it could make Bilbo less willing to give up the ring. In any case, I totally understand how the goodbye would have been hard for both to bear, and maybe this was the best way to resolve that.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Good point.
Jumping over to our YouTube comments on this episode, on episode part 7. We have a couple again from PW Miles and from Inerthil. Let's see here. Very nice run through, lots of points to ponder. For example, I have worked in social care and I have run across some extreme OCD and rituals, which many of us have in some form, checking for keys, wallet, purse, etc. I've always seen anxiety, sadly, in the elderly and sometimes signaling the onset of dementia. I think Bilbo is showing this kind of anxiety, a feeling he has outstayed his time. Earlier, Gandalf has doubted that Bilbo's little joke will seem very funny. I think that's what is behind his remark, not that he is a party pooper. There's an explanation of swept off in Three's company. I think it was used in the film. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, etc. I think you have the right route for Bilbo. This same route is explained in more detail when it is followed by Frodo, Pippin, and Sam 17 years later, which we'll get to in the next chapter, our run through of the next chapter. Inerthil says, John made a great point about Gandalf saying, stop possessing it. For sure, Bilbo had a small corner of his mind thinking of, I will let Frodo take care of my precious for now. I think after Gandalf said that, Bilbo was able to release the One Ring's hold on him at that moment. It makes the story even more intensely on a knife's edge than I had ever thought before. Oh. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
You are quite welcome. You're quite welcome. All right. Yeah, so great comments there on part 7. And then close out some windows here. Moving on to part 8. So before we'll actually hit this is just a little letter we actually received at our TolkienRoadPodcast@gmail.com email account. This is from Sophie S, who is one of our patrons. Sophie says, Hi, John and Greta. Another enjoyable episode. Thanks very much. I especially liked pondering Gandalf's refusal to take the ring and what that meant. The lure of power is greater, I think, for those who want to do the greatest good. And it is most dangerous in such hands. So much that is wrong can be justified wrongly by the belief that we are meant to do good. Perhaps Gandalf knew himself, as a wizard or angel would, better than we might know ourselves in our humanity. He knew the extent of his desire to do good and how the ring could manipulate that desire for its own evil intent. He was wise enough to realize that only in the hands of the meek, the small, the unknowing, might the ring's power be overcome, even if only barely, as we later see. They say that those who have the capacity for the most sublime sainthood are also at risk of committing the worst sins. I don't know if that is true. Grace saves us all if we trust. One other thing, Gandalf was bearing a heavy burden. He knew evil was lurking, growing in power, threatening Middle-earth, and he was on a mission to do something about it. No wonder the birthday party could only make sense to him if he contributed to that crucial mission, which began with Bilbo's relinquishing of the ring. Thanks again for a great, unhasty episode. I've read The Lord of the Rings now 3 times, and there is always more to be savored.
Oh, nice.
Great note, Sophie.
Yeah.
Always good to hear from you. I really enjoyed your comments and insights into Gandalf and maybe the level of kind of moral knowledge that he brings to the table, in all this as a wizard, as a really spiritual, immortal being, that has been around since the beginning, right? And just has and knows other great, powerful spiritual beings and how they think and all these sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
It's a very important thing to keep in mind when it comes to Gandalf throughout the story.
Just his perspective, kind of his bird's eye view of the whole situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, jumping to our Patreon for part 8 here. All right. Make sure we get this on screen. There we go. All right, so a couple of more comments from Harrison C. Oops, didn't want to do that one. Let's see here. There we go. Make this bigger. On the very unsatisfied hobbits, I think Greta was onto it when she mentioned curiosity among the hobbits. I think the dissatisfaction is not with the amount or quality of food or drink, but the unresolved mystery of Bilbo's whereabouts. This may be due to the hobbits' desire to be undisturbed in the boundaries of their knowledge. In the prologue, it says that they like to have books filled with things that they already knew, set out fair and square with no contradictions. Bilbo's vanishment offends that sensibility, something they can't explain. This curiosity may also explain why they were back so early the next day, seemingly to help clear up the party area, but also hoping to get a glimpse of Bilbo or hear news of him. Harrison also says, nice spot on Frodo fidgeting with something in his pocket. What has he got in its pockets? It seems not that he wanted to vanish from the Sackville Bagginses and so was tempted to use the ring then. Interesting theory about the ring being radioactive. The only thing I can think of which suggests this is that the ring can draw people to it, such as when the Nazgul are drawn to Frodo or the Watcher in the water to Frodo. But as for whether the ring can inflame the spirit of possession in someone who isn't wearing it, I guess it's possible too, though wouldn't the ring draw people to possess it rather than just anything that is lying around? First of all, I'm going to dub this RRE, the radioactive ring effect. I think this is going to come up a lot. Okay. But can it draw people to want to possess other things? I think it maybe just increases the spirit of possessiveness towards with the end of, because you kind of think about like, if you think about, obviously we're jumping way ahead here, but if you think about Tom Bombadil and kind of being this character who is completely free and happy because he does not have a spirit of possession, then you can understand how like that kind of juxtaposes with a spirit of possession that wants to possess maybe not just the ring but other things as well, right? Yeah. And maybe in increasing the spirit of possession, it makes you sense the preciousness of this one ring, and so want to possess that all the more, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, great thoughts, Harrison. Richard BW says, fun shows for Chapter 1, but maybe it was fortuitous that Lewis convinced Tolkien to make his Hobbit setup more concise and to move into action sooner. I concur. As much as I do enjoy this first chapter, going through it, there was a little bit of a stretch at times to kind of figure out, hey, what are we going to talk about in this episode? Yeah. But I'm thankful we did it at the same time, because I really do feel like we ended up having great conversations about each section, For sure. But I can understand at the same time why Lewis was like, look, Tollers, I know that you just want to write a whole book just about funny hobbits and all these kind of things and all their goings-ons and everything, and get onto all the details, but maybe you need to get the story moving. Yeah. But even Tolkien then, you're going to find with Chapter 2, still not very hasty to get the story moving. No. Richard goes on to say, of course, that opened the door for Tolkien later to criticize commingled myths in Narnia. Good reminder about Inklings and value of their input. By the way, Gleyer's Bandersnatch provides a lot of insights into their writing process and collaboration. Now finishing second writing with Grandkids Fantasy, I can definitely see the importance of Tolkien and Lewis encouraging one another. So Richard, I believe, has his own book series. Richard, I think you've mentioned that a couple of times. For our next mailbag episode, if you want to mention that series again, I'd be happy to kind of put a shout out to our listeners for that. Yeah. So, but I'm not familiar with Gleyer's Bandersnatch, but I will have to check that out. So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just nice, the Inklings, just especially when it comes to creative pursuits, I think. And I know because I live with a couple of very creative types. I know how introspective and inward they can get, and sometimes having someone else to look at your creation or your writing or whatever from an outside perspective can be very beneficial.
Absolutely. Having other, and I think Tolkien, to his credit, as much as he like just labored and spent all this time creating his legendarium, he truly valued, he had a circle of people that he truly valued their feedback and input from, right? Yeah. And he was very open to that. It can be very hard, I know this from experience, it can be very hard to let people into your creative work and criticize it and say like, this part you think is great, maybe not so great, right? But Tolkien, to his great credit, was always open to those sorts of of feedback from people whose opinion he loved and valued.
Right. And trusted. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. All right. To the YouTube comments for this episode, part 8. So first one is from a short comment from Inerthil. What a great name, Old Winyard, said Greta, like Lord of the Wings.
I forgot about that.
Yes, great moment. PW Miles 56 says, I think the hobbits were unsatisfied because of Bilbo's unexplained, to them, disappearance. Laying down is something you do with the wine itself. It means laying the bottles on their sides, or nearly so, to keep the corks wet so they don't shrink. Oh. So Bungo didn't necessarily own the vineyard, though he might have. The Sackville Bagginses are South Farthing property owners, according to the Scouring of the Shire.
Interesting.
So that was interesting. I did not know that. And a couple of other folks commented the same on that question. The laying down doesn't mean necessarily you like laid down the vineyard. It means that you laying down the bottles of wine on their sides.
Like after you open them?
No,
or that's how
like,
you store
like
them?
how you store them.
That makes
sense. So that makes sense because you like wine racks all store them on their side.
Exactly. No, that does make sense for sure. Yeah.
Very interesting.
That is very interesting.
Let's see here. W Woods 66 said, very unsatisfied hobbits. I always thought they were wanting an explanation and maybe apology for Bilbo's antics, disappearing with a flash and a bang. I never thought the wastebasket was one of the pointed gifts. I mean, it's marked as with love from Bilbo. And if Dora Baggins is really writing reams of good advice, Tolkien's description, not Bilbo's, in correspondence, she needs one for first drafts, letters, and envelopes received that she doesn't need to keep, etc. The thing about Angelica is that she's vain, too obviously considered her face shapely. So the mirror is going to distort her appearance in a less attractive direction, make her face look rounder and her nose a bit bigger. Okay, so he's saying that the considered her face shapely is saying that she considered herself beautiful. Okay, I wasn't sure. I guess I just don't say like, oh, that person's face is very shapely.
Okay. Yeah.
I assumed that that he was giving her a mirror to make her like that would more clearly represent what she actually looked like or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Is that what he says?
That's what W Wood 66 here is saying.
No, but is that what okay, so shapely is a direct quote. Okay.
Yeah, he gives her this mirror because she considered her face.
I think that is interesting because I think of people's figures being shapely. I don't really think of faces as being shapely.
Yeah.
But then I guess that makes sense when you think about, like jaw lines or, defined facial features.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, shapely it could be used to describe a good-looking face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. So Bilbo's gift actually was meant to take to kind of move her self appraisement in a less attractive direction, I guess is the point there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I still I understand the comment about the wastebasket, but I just feel like I know Bilbo too well, and I still think it's a pointed gift.
Yeah.
I think it's like showing her where you can put all of your good advice.
I kind of feel like that too, but I can see
I can see both ways. Yeah. I can too.
Point.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the fun. I guess that's again the fun of this is there's ambiguity in this.
Exactly. And you can choose.
How am I supposed to? Yeah. How am I supposed to take this? Like Bilbo seems to have been a master of that kind of thing. Like, yeah. How am I supposed to? Like, that's the whole thing about his comment at the party, right? You know, I know less than half of you, half as well. That whole comment, right? You're like, how am I supposed to take that? Like, that's the whole. That's kind of the hilarity of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's open to interpretation,
right?
And it really just has to. And it's interesting because, like, if what you think of that character that's saying it is how you're going to choose to interpret it.
All this stuff just makes me love Tolkien all the more because I'm just like, he must have been a lot of fun to be around. Like, I mean, just like you think about sitting there and he just like has these like little comments to say to you to kind of, but you'd know that like if you were sitting there with him and he made one of these comments, he wasn't saying this to like make you uncomfortable. He was saying this to encourage you to like kind of encourage witty banter with you.
Exactly.
To have fun.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. I see that comment there too. I don't know if you're gonna bring it up, but the RSVP if not coming. That like makes me think like just the whole thing about the invitation that he sent out, right? Yeah. I mean, that's just the perfect example.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then to that point, Zephyr Optional says, I love Hobbit banter. Wit with language seems to be just part of their culture. Modern philosopher Slavoj Zizek, I think I'm saying that correctly, talks about how social cohesion in societies are best when people can gently and humorously insult one another, diffusing the potential for cruelty and violence among those who you might have disagreements with. If we had more hobbitish people in the world, it would be a merrier place for sure. Thank you both.
Amen.
I just said I love that point.
So true.
I that's something I sense, but I couldn't have put it as as well as Zizek did there. You get that sense, like people who have genuine like affection and love for one another, like when people can kind of gently and humorously insult you, like
Yeah,
it's almost like it's not even really an insult. It might sound like an insult if you don't know like what's going on.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But then you realize it's kind of like it's just for fun. Like it's just kind of like, hey, we're just being silly with each other.
We're just poking fun at each other. Yeah, and it goes both ways, right?
Let's not take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, exactly. But then the common thread there is love, right? Because the people, like, it has to be the person saying the comment, right? Like, needs to be saying it from a place of love, and then the person receiving it needs to be able to recognize, oh, this person loves and cares about me, so surely this is where that's coming from, right? It's a recognition of, it's like, it's a two-way street there.
I feel like my dad was really, like, he was really good at that kind of thing.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
The kind of give and take.
It like took me off guard. I remember when I was first meeting him, I was like, your dad hates me. But then I realized, like, oh no,
he adores you.
No, I know. But like but see, that's the thing is, like, I was interpreting his comments from a wrong-hearted place. And also because I didn't know him very well yet. Yeah. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just a lot of truth,
There's
a lot
so
of truth
much
to
truth to
that great comment
I love
there.
That. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Zipper optional.
It makes me want to go read some of that guy's stuff.
Yeah.
Zizek.
Slavio Zizek. SLAVOJZIZEK.
Okay.
So go
All
look
right.
it up.
I'm going to.
You have an assignment. Go look it
All
up.
right. I'm going to do it.
All right. And then finally to number 9, the cicada is cheering for us.
This has been a marathon,
This has been a marathon. I'm telling you.
I wonder how many people are still listening.
Imagine if we tried to do all of the comments you guys left. This thing would be like 3 times as long.
Yeah, wow.
All right. All right. So a couple of final comments for this round with Harrison C. That Gandalf merely suspected the ring could be more than just a normal ring of power and did not immediately conclude that it was the ruling ring suggests that the ruling ring was not the only ring that could stir a spirit of possessiveness or cause its wearer to become invisible, which raises all sorts of interesting questions about what sorts of rings were out there and why they were made as such by the elven smiths of Eregion. Well, I think if you kind of think of the rings as, and through that lens of like magic and machine and technology, right? That they sort of, my favorite thing is to kind of compare it to the idea of the cell phone, right? Like that you've got all this power in this little thing, right? These abilities to do different things, just kind of comprised within your little device right here, right? I think if you consider it in that regard, right? Like if you think about like when you don't know where your cell phone is, right? You don't know where your iPhone or whatever is, right? You're like what happened to my iPhone, right? It gets a little scary for you, and you're like, hey, that's my iPhone, get off of it, right? That's got all of my power in it, right? So I think there is something to the notion that just by nature of the powers that these things bestowed, that itself can drive possessiveness. So is the possessiveness driven by the thing itself, or is it driven within the heart, right? The spirit of the person that's trying to that wants to possess it.
I would argue that for sure. Like there's a little bit of the first as well, but I feel like there's definitely the connection, or how the possessor views the thing has more of an impact on that.
Well, and with the ruling ring also, there's the notion that Sauron seems to have put something of himself into it, like literally something of himself. Now, I would say that like whenever you create something like that, you put part of yourself into it, right? So even maybe all of the rings had some element of Sauron, or not the elven rings, but some of them, after he taught them, certain new things about the ring crafting and that kind of thing, contained both him but also something of the people who created them, the elves who created them within them.
Yeah, agreed.
And Harrison also says, now I noticed that Frodo's use of the phrase disturber of the peace on Gandalf in the movies was actually from Gandalf in the books. I would imagine that Frodo would have been revolted at the thought of reproducing Lobelia's words towards Gandalf. So it is perhaps almost amusing that while some hobbits believed that Gandalf and Frodo had plotted to off Bilbo, they still turned up at Bag End in hopes of acquiring Bilbo's possessions. Bilbo could have been kidnapped or killed for all they knew, and yet it did not seem to deter them from showing up, however dangerous that they may have thought Gandalf was.
Again, that desire for possession.
Yep, indeed. All right, we are on the home stretch here, everyone. Going to our YouTube page for this episode 9 here. All right. And Erithil says, the ages-long question, is stealing from a thief really stealing? Shout out to Sancho. And PW Miles 56 says, farewell just means goodbye. In Quenya, it is literally Namarie, Galadriel's song of parting. Sancho Panza was Don Quixote's servant. There are a few other Spanish names among the hobbits. For example, Iago, Jago, but in Spanish, Iago, Spanish for James as in Santiago. Vigo, the port city, well known in British history. Bilbo is a kind of steal from Bilbao, but also something rude. Tolkien liked Spanish, which he learned from his guardian, Father Morgan, who was half Spanish. Interesting. Great connection there. Yeah. That totally makes sense. Expect me when you see me is quite common in Britain. I don't think Tolkien invented it. It's clear from the next chapter that Gandalf is disturbed by Bilbo's behavior and guesses this might be the One Ring. This is why he looks troubled. So I still like expect. It's not something we say in America for sure. Expect me when you see me. But I think I might start using that myself. Yeah. I like it so much. Expect me when you see me. Farewell for now. Expect me when you see me. Yes.
That's good. Very good.
All right. And last but certainly not least is another email to us from our Tolkien Road podcast at gmail.com email account. This is from Eric O, longtime listener and correspondent. Hi, John. Welcome back, Greta. I've enjoyed your saunter through Chapter 1. Best wishes for seeing this through. One amazing aspect of J.R.R.T's writing in these early chapters is how he brings together readers with different prior experiences with Middle-earth. When I first read Lord of the Rings in the 70s, I skipped an introductory material and was a bit confused about Bilbo and his prior adventure. But these hurdles weren't big enough to stop me from reading on. Others might have read the first or second edition of The Hobbit, but J.R.R.T. brings them in and prepares the reader for some twists and turns in the story. And of course, most new readers will experience the movies or series before experiencing Lord of the Rings. Yet J.R.R.T's writing style brings them in as well. And finally, there are all the rereaders of Lord of the Rings who know where the story is going, and J.R.R.T. brings them in as well, providing treasures to careful readers. I don't know how he does it, but it seems to be related to his interest in how his characters know what they know. Which version of Bilbo's adventure did Frodo hear? When does Gandalf know this is the One Ring, and how does he know it? Is the ring influencing Frodo already? J.R.R.T's writing style invites the reader to try to figure this out, speculate, and look for further clues. I'd like to know how you and Greta, Anagram for Great, see this, given your different experiences with Lord of the Rings. I mean, I think that's why we're doing this, right? Because, you know, I've read Lord of the Rings several times. You know, of course, I've seen the movies who knows how many times. But I just had this sense that, like, the last time we did Lord of the Rings on this podcast, you know, many years ago now, it almost like it's funny because we felt like we took our time. You know, we were like, wow, we did like, you know, an episode on each chapter. Some were like 3 episodes, right? There were a few chapters that were like 3 episodes. We really took our time. It was like probably almost 100 episodes in total. But as I was thinking about it, I was like, I felt rushed going through it. You know, I felt like there was so much detail that we didn't get a chance to talk about. And that was why I was like, let's do this thing, right? Yeah. It's crazy. It's, you know, who would do this? But I was like, Lord of the Rings and Tolkien are worth it, right? There are worse things to put your time and effort into in this life. So I really felt like that was the right way to go, and it was going to be a really rewarding experience. And so far, it has been. Yeah. You know, very early on the journey, but it has been.
Agreed. Yeah. I second everything that you just said.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny because my personal experience with Tolkien really is just completely through John, because I don't think I didn't read the books until you and I were together, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think after I saw the movies, I think I read the books.
Yeah. Well, same for me. I didn't read the books until after I'd seen the movies. So
yeah. Fantasy was just never like my go-to for reading. I actually wasn't even a big reader in high school. I read what I had to read for high school, and that was it.
Yeah, you're a big reader now.
I'm a huge
you read
reader now.
You read all kinds
I
of
thought
things.
that reading wasn't cool, and then I realized it was. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Or you realized that you weren't cool, and so it was okay to read. Either one works.
Either one works.
You know?
Either one works.
I mean, I think you're cool, and I think reading is cool. I'm just saying that it could work the other way, too.
It could work the other way as well. Yeah. Well, what really matters is that I've discovered reading, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading is cool in the way that you don't think of as cool in high school. Right?
Exactly.
Because you have bad notions of what's cool in high school.
You do. You absolutely do, because you don't know yourself and all that. But you also have a lot of required reading in when you're in school. And sometimes when you're required to read something, it takes the joy and pleasure out of it.
Yeah.
So when you get to choose what you read, you're just approaching it from a completely different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right on. Eric, thanks for the great note.
Yes.
Please keep in touch as we continue on this journey. Hey, once again, thank you, everybody, for all of your mail. I wish we could have read every single comment, every single note from our Patreon page. But this was already looking at almost an hour and a half here, so to get through this.
Okay.
So, and we do, although we are trying not to be hasty, we do have other episodes, other read-throughs of Tolkien's material to get through, and I know that's ultimately what we're all here for.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Thanks so much for your correspondence. This was a treasure trove, and I wish I could have discussed every last bit on air. So please keep the comments coming.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one or all of the following ways.
First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Go ahead.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps to get the word out about the Tolkien Road, and that also helps us to keep on evering on.
Right on. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point with Don't Be Hasty. We'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of the chapter, as you just saw.
We just did.
We can't promise you will be read on air, but we'll do our best, and some correspondence most certainly will.
Don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R.
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien.
KG.
Melkor27.
SaberSystems.
James D. Oh no, Jeremy D.
Emilio P.
Jonathan D.
Richard K.
Paul D.
Julia.
Werty.
Chris B.
Turo91.
Carolyn S.
Emiel K.
Brian O. II.
Jonathan R.
Matthew W.
Daniel D.
Harrison C.
Jason C.
Seb M.
Willbo Baggins.
Ms. Anonymous.
Andrew T.
Redhawk.
Shannon S.
Brian O. I.
Zeke F.
James L.
Chris L.
Asya V.
Ish of the Hammer.
Teresa C.
David of Pints with Jack.
And Eric B. Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.